It's 2006. A coal mine in West Virginia has exploded, trapping 13 people inside it. Only one makes it out alive. A train in Mumbai, India has been attacked by the ISIS. 209 people die, 715 are critically injured. And here in Kenya, a supermarket retail giant, has started to collapse. And this is that story.
Taken fast for Uchumi supermarkets, with the retailer announcing the closure of 2 stores in Uganda. The move comes as part of reorganization of the business led by a new CEO, Julius Kipngetich, in an effort of making the stores profitable. Uchumi, which operates 37 stores in the region, announced a pre-tax loss.
The question is, why did Uchumi collapse? Well, the very basic facts that you should know is that Uchumi was actually one of the first supermarkets in the country to be incorporated and owned as a parastatal by the government. Uchumi Supermarkets, the giant that ruled Kenyan retailing business for decades, one of the most famous Kenyan supermarkets that many people thought was too big to fail. Uchumi is a word in the native East African Swahili language which means economy. The history of Uchumi is rather a controversial one. The supermarket giant, founded in 1975 as a public limited liability company, the supermarket was founded by 3 Kenyan parastatals, namely the ICDC, Kenya Wines Agency Limited, and Kenya National Trading Corporation. And the main objective was to provide outlets for equitable distribution of commodities for local manufacturers. I know those are many words, but try keep up. The young retail chain hired Standard SPA to teach Kenyans on how to run the business. Well, Standard SPA was an Italian firm that was initially given the directive to control and run the supermarket, but this would turn out to be a disaster and a big mistake. But let's go on. It's worth noting that the future was looking bright and Uchumi kicked off, opening the first 3 branches in 1976. The forthcoming years, Uchumi continued to grow, cementing itself as a reliable, cheap, with quality goods supermarket. It became so successful that it opened branches in 2 neighboring countries of Uganda and Tanzania. Uchumi entered Tanzania in early 2012 with plans of opening 6 more branches by the end of that year. 3 in Dar es Salaam, 1 in Arusha, 1 in Morogoro and Mwanza. This was confirmed by the then Mr. Lenana, Uchumi's Tanzania manager at the time, whilst having entered Uganda a little bit earlier. The retail giant went ahead and listed in 4 countries, Kenya being one of them, at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, first in 1992. In the following years, Uchumi would go ahead and list in Uganda, Tanzania, and even Rwanda Stock Exchange, having its 6 largest shareholders as Jamii Bora Bank, 15.8%, Kenya Ministry of Trade, 15.4%, and billionaire Paul Wanderi Ndung'u having a 5.4% stake, and Kenya Wine Agency Limited Holdings having a 4.3%, Equity 4.1%, Karim Jamal 2.3%, 16th International Dehaze 1.1%, and other entities in East Africa amounted for the rest of 52.3%, amounting to 100%. Trouble in the retail chain started brewing in early 2001. In 2001, the Kenya Industrial and Commercial Development Corporation, the ICDC, made a bold step in introducing a popular industrialist, Chris Kirubi, to join Uchumi's board of directors. Kirubi replaced Suresh Shah, a man who joined ICDC in a similar way back in the 80s. After Standard SPA ran Uchumi into losses for 4 years straight, this prompted ICDC to take action, being one of the first investors of the business as a parastatal entity amongst the others. By the time Chris Kirubi joined the board, employees were looting the chain left, right, center. With little to no follow-up being done, this then stirred the pot, and in no time, trouble would start to brew on the horizon of Uchumi's supermarket giant. You also have to remember that Chris was already a rich man by this time and owned a few properties in town. By town, I mean in Nairobi CBD. And he and the ICDC were also significant shareholders of the company, and Chris wasn't going to make any losses at this point. Even though Chris, who was accused of these cases of fraud and conspiracy to defraud Uchumi, selling its prime property to investors for 147 million, it's worth noting that a lot of Kenyans do believe that most of what he did when he joined Uchumi franchise is what led to the initial collapse of the chain. Kirubi led an expansion drive for the retailer, and at first the policies worked, making an initial 100 million cash Kenyan money profit to the chain on his first year as board members. The chain made a profit of 1.3 billion that year, 100 million coming from Chris Kirubi having introduced his policies of expansion and rapidly making Uchumi more profitable. However, when auditors came to unravel the yarn, they discovered nothing but a disaster. First, the expansion that lasted 2 years came with extra costs, and some branches opened without proper feasibility studies and no business plans. No customers for thousands of shelves of commodities like greeting and success cards, costing a whopping $65,000 that no one was buying at the time. Then in 2004, the board, also led by chairman Chris Kirubi, sold Uchumi's most valuable asset that at the time was a third of the current market price at the time. And on the 11th of June 2004, the Uchumi board sold the Uchumi Aga Khan Walk branch, and Algate Limited bought it for 147 million Kenyan money and later turned around to rent it to Uchumi for 1.7 million per month. But this building was worth at least $500 million Kenyan money by the time it was being sold by Chris Kirubi and its board of members for Uchumi. This, however, was counteracted by a statement saying that the retailer was in bad shape, and if it was going to be saved, well, the sale of such a low amount was the only way that the retailer would be saved. Ordinary Kenyans did not agree. This was the point where the mistake was done. In 2005, losses in Uchumi retail were uncontainable, owing a whopping 3.6 billion Kenyan money bankrupt. Huge discounts were imposed on very, very expensive items on Uchumi's retail giants. The retail chains were giving away very huge discounts at very low prices for commodities that were rather very expensive. And the first bubble at this point busted. Goods worth millions of shillings could not be accounted for, suppliers were not getting paid in time, and hence why many Kenyans believe that Chris Kirubi, as the then acting chairman of Uchumi, single-handedly brought down the thriving retailer giant, Kenya's first and government-owned parastatal entity that stood for 3 decades with a very strong foundation and made a killing by short-selling his stocks before the company went under. Before Uchumi, Chris Kirubi was also involved in a Kenyan transportation company back in the 80s. You probably have heard of it, and if you haven't, don't worry, a video about it is coming very soon, which also went under. In 2006, Uchumi was placed under receivership by the 2 banks and delisted from the Nairobi Securities Exchange. But it's worth noting that Uchumi's best performing fiscal year was a 17 billion profit in the fiscal year ending June-July 2014. When the government tried to revive the once untouchable giant of retail business, this did not go well. But these efforts would not bear fruits actually. At its peak, Uchumi had 37 outlets, and by late 2015, 34 of the 37 had closed down, leaving only 3 operating in Nairobi, that is Lang'ata branch, Nairobi West branch, and the Ngong Road branch, all in Nairobi County. In June 2015, the CFO of the time, Jonathan Siano was fired under allegation of gross misconduct, and the new CEO was hired in August of 2015, but the damage was already done. The final nail in the coffin came in October of 2015 when Uchumi closed all its stores in Uganda and Tanzania, stating lack of profits as the main cause. In the process, 900 people lost their jobs. They were laid off, 400 of them being from Uganda alone. In the end, this came to be known as the greatest corporate disaster in independent Kenya since its inception as a state. The lesser known part of the Uchumi story is that in June of 2006, Uchumi had unpaid invoices of up to 1.8 billion Kenyan money from PTA Bank and KCB. Remember, these two banks are the banks that put Uchumi under receivership, and they were breathing a lot of fire, Uchumi, and demanding their money. And soon after Uchumi was placed under receivership, it's highlighted as one of the most notable failures of Chris Kirubi, an industrialist who was so ruthless with making profits that this actually landed him in court. It's also worth noting that no sooner had this happened than the government started seeking to punish all the culprits who were involved in the collapsing of this giant supermarket. Chris Kirubi was involved, together with 13 others who were board members of the company at the time it collapsed, went on to be arraigned in court and were to be charged over the collapse and sale of the Aga Khan Walk Uchumi branch. There was also Lloyd Masika, who are real estate agents and own properties. They also lease and sell properties in Nairobi and in Kenya in general. Most of the buildings you'll see in Nairobi are probably leased or sold by Lloyd Masika real estate. They were also arraigned, and so was Algate directors, the directors who bought the Uchumi branch in Nairobi CBD, Aga Khan Walk. 15 witnesses of Uchumi were brought as witnesses, but the judge, who by the time was Gilbert Mutembei, acquitted them, citing lack of substantial ground by the case and seeing it as not going anywhere. Today, only 3 stores in Nairobi remain with CEO Julius Kipngetich overseeing business. Many Kenyans, however, do think and do blame Chris Kirubi solely for the collapse of the retail giant, and many of them may never forgive him. And actually, most of the people who hold Chris Kirubi accountable are employees of the fallen Uchumi giant. There are people who worked in the Uchumi retailing shops themselves. They are the ones who usually cite Chris Kirubi as the reason as to why such a disaster happened to such big retailing business in Kenya. And so that's the story of Uchumi. I know it's a little bit longer than you expected, but it's worth noting that this story needed to be told because there is a lot of conspiracies as to why Uchumi failed, but this is the real story. This is the story that you should trust because I've done research on it and I think it's pretty much accurate. And so I've been your host, Ian Best Smith. Please make sure to subscribe, share this video with your friends, make sure they know that I do this kind of videos, and God is going to bless you. Hope to see you next time, and have yourself a lovely day, evening, morning, whatever time you're watching this, and see you next time. Thanks.